All right, so welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive with us. Today, we've got some fascinating stuff to get into from Malaysia. You guys have sent in some really interesting articles about some recent political happenings over there. And yeah, let's just say some things are going on that have us scratching our heads a little bit. We're going to be talking about the acquittal of Rosmah Mansor. Now she is the wife of former Prime Minister Najib Razak. And what's really got us intrigued is the almost radio silence from politicians who used to be really, really critical of her.
Yeah, it's definitely a situation that has a lot of people asking questions,
Yeah.
especially people who are following the Pakatan Harapan coalition,
Yeah.
PH for short. Their victory back in 2018, a big part of that was their anti-corruption platform.
Exactly. Back then, PH, and that includes parties like the Democratic Action Party, DAP, the People's Justice Party, PKR,
Yeah.
and the National Trust Party, Aman, all of them were so vocal, criticizing Rosmah and Najib. They kind of became the faces of the corruption that PH was, trying to get rid of.
Yeah, and Rosmah especially.
Yeah.
She was always in the spotlight for her lavish lifestyle. But here we are today, and she's been acquitted of 17 charges, money laundering and tax evasion. And what's really surprising is how quiet people like Tony Pua from DAP and Rafizi Ramli from PKR have been. I mean, they were always the first ones to call her out before.
Yeah, you almost can't hear anything from them now. It's so quiet. It really makes you wonder what their game plan is. Maybe they're picking their battles or something. Or maybe there's some kind of deal happening behind the scenes that we don't know about.
It's possible.
Yeah.
We definitely have to consider all those angles. It's interesting that the only PH politician who's really said anything is Abbas Salimi from Aman. And even he just said that he thinks the verdict was fair, there wasn't any interference.
Yeah.
But everyone else from PH, especially those who made a name for themselves by going after people like Rosmah, they've been really quiet.
It is pretty strange, especially when you think about some of the things they said in the past. I mean, just a couple months ago, Tony Pua was making all these sarcastic comments when Najib apologized for that whole 1MDB scandal.
Yeah.
To go from that to basically saying nothing. Now, it's a huge change.
It is. And it really begs the question, what does this silence mean? Is this them being practical, focusing on actually running the country instead of just scoring political points? Or does it look like they're going back on their promises, which could really upset the people who voted for them?
Yeah, and it's not even just about Rosmah. We're seeing this kind of thing happen more and more. Look at Musa Aman. He got appointed as sub-governor even though he had all those corruption charges against him in the past. And then there's Ahmad Zahid Hamidi, the current deputy prime minister. All the charges against him in that corruption case got dropped.
Yeah, and we can't forget that Zahid Hamidi actually managed to get all 47 corruption charges against him completely dropped because the prosecution wanted to drop the case without saying he was innocent. In legal terms, it's called a DNAA. It's definitely something that's causing a lot of debate about what this means for fighting corruption in Malaysia.
It's a lot to think about. So we have all these people who are accused of corruption, and now either they're not guilty anymore or the cases against them are gone, and the people who are their biggest critics aren't saying anything about it. What does that tell us about what's happening in Malaysian politics right now?
It's complicated. It's easy to jump to conclusions, but I think we need to look at it from all sides. Is this just politics as usual? Have alliances shifted? Are people's opinions changing? There's a lot going on here, and it's important to understand the little details.
Yeah, so let's take a step back and think about what all of this could mean. What could this silence from PH, especially with all these acquittals happening, mean for their whole message of fighting corruption?
Well, for one thing, the people who support them might feel like they've been betrayed. Like PH has abandoned the very ideas that got them elected. And that could make people lose faith in the whole political system. It could. But then again, maybe PH is actually being smart about this.
What do you mean?
Well, maybe they think that if they just focus on governing and actually doing what they promised, that'll be more important to people, more than, arguing and calling people out. Maybe they're thinking that actions speak louder than words.
So they're saying we'll prove we're serious about this by what we do, not just by what we say. But doesn't that kind of make them look weak? I mean, you have these people who they were saying were corrupt, and now they're in the government.
Yeah, it's tricky. If they seem too friendly with these people,
Right.
It'll look like they've just become part of the problem. But if they start criticizing everyone, it could cause problems for the whole coalition government.
They're stuck between a rock and a hard place. They say something, they might upset the balance of power. But if they don't say anything, they could lose their supporters.
Exactly. And this is something we're seeing all over the world, not just in Malaysia. People are losing faith in politics. They feel like politicians are only interested in staying in power, not in helping people.
So how does that affect Malaysia? What could happen in the long run if things keep going this way?
One possibility is that people will just stop trusting the government altogether. If they think that powerful people can get away with anything no matter what, well, it just makes people cynical and they stop caring.
Yeah.
And that could lead to fewer people voting, people feeling helpless, and that weakens democracy.
That's not a very hopeful picture. Is there anything good that could come out of this?
Well, there's always another side to the coin. Maybe this period of stability, even if people are a little disillusioned, could actually be a good thing. Maybe PH is thinking that if they focus on things like the economy, social programs, education, if they can actually make people's lives better in a concrete way, that will be more meaningful in the end.
So they're playing the long game. They're hoping that if they get results, that will outweigh any concerns about these compromises they've made.
That could be their strategy. But of course, only time will tell if it works. The opposition is definitely going to try to use this against them. They'll say that PH has abandoned their principles just to stay in power. And that could really sway some voters, especially the ones who are already feeling disappointed.
Yeah, that's a powerful argument in politics.
Definitely. They might also try to present themselves as the real fighters against corruption, to show that they're different from PH. Whether people will believe them is another question, but that's probably what they'll try to do.
So it sounds like we're entering a whole new phase in Malaysian politics, one where the lines between the old guard and the reformers are getting blurred. And there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of potential problems, and maybe even some opportunities that we don't see yet.
Exactly. And to make it through this new phase, they'll need to be really careful and strategic, but most importantly, they need to be truly committed to serving the people, no matter what their political party is.
It's a big challenge, but it's crucial for the future of Malaysia. So for our listeners who are trying to understand all of this, what would you say are the most important things to remember?
I think the main thing is to be critical. Don't just believe everything you hear, whether it's from PH, the opposition, or even the media. Dig deeper, look at it from different angles, and come to your own conclusions.
That's good advice for anyone who's interested in politics anywhere in the world. Don't just read the headlines, do your own research, find different perspectives, and talk about it with other people.
Exactly. Informed citizens are the foundation of a healthy democracy. And in times like these, when things are changing and uncertain, that's more important than ever.
I agree. Now, you were saying that this disillusionment with politics is a global trend. How do you see what's happening in Malaysia fitting into that bigger picture?
Well, I think it shows this growing tension between wanting stability and wanting accountability. On the one hand, people want things to be predictable. They want a government that can deal with all the complexities of the world. But at the same time, they want leaders who are ethical and transparent. Leaders who are truly working for the good of the people. We're seeing this tension play out in different ways all over the world. And Malaysia is a perfect example of that struggle.
So it's not just about Malaysia. It's about this fundamental question that democracies everywhere are facing. How do we have a government that works while also having leaders we can trust?
Exactly. And I think finding that balance is the biggest challenge we face today.
This is giving us a lot to think about, but you've given our listeners some really valuable insights. Before we move on, is there anything else you think they should keep in mind as they learn more about this?
Yes. I would encourage them to pay attention not only to what is being said, but also to what is not being said. The silences in politics can be just as important as the speeches.
That's such a great point.
So as you continue to explore this topic, listen closely, not just to the words themselves, but to the spaces between them. Ask yourself why some voices are being heard while others are being silenced. And always try to understand the hidden motives and power dynamics that are at work. Often the real story is hidden in those subtle details.
I love that. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the acquittals, PHH's response, the possible consequences, and the bigger global context. Now, I know you mentioned some specific resources for our listeners, right?
Yes. I would recommend reading the full article on Malaysia Now. It gives a very detailed account of everything that's been happening. You can find a link to it in the show notes.
Perfect. Are there any other resources or things our listeners could look into?
If you want to really understand Malaysian politics, I suggest learning about the history of the different political parties, their beliefs, and how their alliances have changed over time. There are some great books and articles out there that go into all of that.
That's a great idea. Understanding the history is so important for understanding what's happening today. Now, before we wrap up this part of the deep dive, I want to bring up something that's been on my mind. You know, we've been talking a lot about the politicians, the strategies, all the possible outcomes, but I keep thinking, what about the everyday people in Malaysia? How are they feeling about all of this? What's their perspective?
That's really the key question, isn't it? In the end, it's public opinion that's going to determine what happens. I imagine people have mixed feelings. Some are probably just relieved that things are calmer now after so much political drama. They might be willing to overlook some of these compromises if it means having a government that's more stable and predictable.
That makes sense. When there's economic uncertainty or unrest in the world, people just want things to feel steady.
Exactly. But then there are probably a lot of people who are looking at these acquittals and thinking something's not right. Like the system is rigged to protect the powerful and that they're above the law. That kind of thinking can lead to a lot of cynicism and people just giving up on the whole political process.
It's got to be really confusing for the people who believed in PH's message of change, who thought they were going to fight corruption, and now the people they criticized are either cleared of charges or back in power. It kind of goes against everything that got PH elected in the first place.
Yeah, it does. And it creates a real challenge for PH. How do they move forward in this new political landscape without losing their credibility?
So how do they win back the people who are feeling disillusioned? What can they do to show that they haven't abandoned their principles?
Well, they say actions speak louder than words. They need to show real progress on the things that matter to Malaysians. The rising cost of living, access to good education and healthcare, creating more jobs. They have to deliver on those promises.
And they have to do it in a way that's open and honest. No more shady deals or compromises that make people think the system is corrupt.
Exactly. Transparency and accountability are essential for rebuilding trust. They also need to be more upfront with the public, explaining their decisions and addressing people's concerns directly.
So it's not just about governing well, it's about governing in a way that's open and honest and being responsive to what people need and what they're worried about.
Absolutely.
Mm.
And it's about being truly committed to ethical leadership,
Hmm.
even when it's hard, even when it means making tough decisions.
Okay, so for our listeners who have been taking all of this and trying to figure out what it means for the future of Malaysia, what's the most important thing for them to remember?
I would say don't give up hope. Change takes time, and there are always going to be bumps in the road. But working towards a more just and fair society is always worth it. Stay involved, stay informed, and hold your leaders accountable.
That's a great message. And remember, the future of Malaysia isn't set in stone. It's being created every day by the actions of its citizens, by their involvement in politics, by their demands for accountability and transparency. So stay curious, stay informed, and never underestimate your own ability to make a difference.
Well said. It's been a pleasure talking about these complex issues with you.
I agree. And to all our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Malaysian politics. We hope you found it insightful, thought-provoking, and maybe even a little bit inspiring. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep learning.